When I was about 19 years old, I lived and worked in a town north of Chicago called Vernon Hills. This was over 25 years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday, especially the feeling I got when I finally realized how close I came to being involved in something I most certainly did not want to be. Let me explain what happened. I worked in a local chain restaurant as I went to college. It wasn't uncommon for me to be going home late at night, especially if I was the one who closed. One late night, I was driving home. I lived in an apartment behind a large mall located there. I decided to stop for gas and cigarettes at a corner store located by the mall less than 5 minutes from where I lived. I have since quit smoking because it's really unhealthy and overall a disgusting habit. Anyway, this gas station just had a small cubicle-like area for the cashier, not a big store or anything. I pulled into the gas station and got out of my car to pump the gas. Nothing happened and the pump didn't turn on. I walked about halfway to the attendant and noticed that there was no one there. That's strange. They should be open, I thought to myself. And for some reason I just stopped walking and went back to my car since no attendant could be seen. I went to a different gas station to fill up. It wasn't for some time later that I found out why there appeared to be no attendant on duty. I say there appeared to be no attendant because, in fact, there was one there, but he wasn't visible. As a matter of fact, he was just murdered by a man in a robbery only minutes before I got there, and his body was laying on the ground in his cubicle. This man was struck 20 times in the head with a claw hammer for a few $100s. This happened back in 1989. The murderer had an accomplice, but he admitted to tying up and gagging the attendant on duty, then killing him. It was a man in his mid-40s named George Wilson. The murderer's name was Don Bartels. It was reported that after he tied his victim up, he stopped for a 5-minute smoke break before beating the man's head in with the hammer. The judge in the case was quoted as saying, "That must have been the longest 5 minutes of Wilson's life." That statement has always haunted me. It was the weekend after Thanksgiving, and the pair thought they would get an upwards of $20,000, but only ended up stealing about $350. They were caught and sentenced almost a year later. The killer got 90 years, and his accomplice received a 50-year sentence. This has greatly bothered me over the years, and I still think about it occasionally. I have mixed feelings from this episode in my life. I was absolutely shocked when I first heard the details, realizing that I had just missed this horrendous murder. It was almost surreal for me. I often thought to myself, what if I had arrived just a few minutes earlier as it was happening? Could I have prevented that man from losing his life, or would I have just been another body lying dead on the ground? Also, why didn't I walk all the way up to the cubicle? I'm glad that I didn't witness the gruesome scene of the poor man's head bashed in with a claw hammer, but then I could have at least notified the police. I sometimes feel ashamed for being relieved that I didn't get there earlier and missing the ordeal entirely. I'm also happy I didn't see the gore for myself. Just thinking about it turns my stomach every day. I feel sad for the attendant and can't help but vividly imagine his dead body lying unrecognizably and bleeding only feet away from when I decided to turn around and just go to another gas station. Now, as I look at my wife and kids, I do thank God that it worked out the way it did for me, but I still can't help but feel ashamed for some reason. I had a day off from work, so I decided to spend the evening relaxing on my bed, playing some video games on my PlayStation. Now to put this into perspective, I had a few cats at the time, so fairly frequently you'd hear them come through the cat flap. But given how often that happened, I got used to it and pretty much drowned the sound out. But on that particular evening, I noticed the cat flap rattling frequently. After several rattles downstairs, I went out onto the landing outside my room and flicked on the light. I spent a few moments looking down at the cat flap, wondering if any of our cats were having trouble getting in. I didn't see anything and proceeded to go back into my room and continue playing. A few minutes later, I could smell the distinct aroma of petrol coming from somewhere inside the house. My first thought was that it's my dad's petrol scooter and it had started to leak, so I decided to go downstairs and check. On my way down the stairs, I saw my mom and dad, who also noticed the smell, and we were all wondering where it was coming from. While I checked my dad's scooter for leaks, my dad went up and down the house trying to locate the source of the smell. After a couple of minutes of feeling around my dad's scooter and finding no leaks at all, I went back to the hallway and continued to search around the house. I suddenly remembered what was going on with the cat flap, and I immediately went over to check. Kneeling down in front of it, I stuck my hand inside, and my worst fears were confirmed. Someone had been pouring petrol into the cat flap, and I can only assume that's when I had come out of my room to check, and I scared the bastard away. Quickly, I went to the back door and grabbed a crowbar that was hanging on the outside near the shed, before heading outside with a torch to make sure there was no one hiding in the small alleyway next to our house. Finding no one, I went around the house to make sure that everyone was safe, and I found a small water bottle next to the cat flap with a small amount of petrol inside of it. I brought the bottle inside and showed my parents. They were both shocked that someone would even want to do this to us, and I don't think any of us got any sleep that night. And to the asshole who tried to burn down our house, I hope we never meet again. I grew up in a small foothill town just south of Tahoe where this whole mess happened. It was a few years back, but I think about it frequently. I'm a fairly tall girl on the thinner side. I've always been convinced that my height was a factor in deterring creepy people from bothering me. I used to run through a smaller sub-neighborhood within my mom's neighborhood frequently. I was about 17 when this happened. I was about 10 minutes into my run, not exhausted luckily, when this began. I saw an all-white van driving near me when I entered the neighborhood. I had my headphones in, so I wasn't aware that it had been following me for a great deal of time. Another 10 minutes passed. I looked back and I could see the van, but this time it was parked. I got kinda creeped out at this point, but I figured it would be best to turn directly and stare at them to make sure they knew I saw them. I don't know why it seems like the best option for me at the time, but I had been told in a self-defense class before to make eye contact and stand your ground, so I guess that's what I tried to do. I could see a young man, maybe in his mid to late 20s, driving the van, but I couldn't quite see who was in the passenger seat at the time, but someone was definitely there. I felt like I had been staring them down for at least a couple minutes, and none of us were moving. Then the passenger side opens, and out steps this beautiful young blonde woman. She couldn't have been older than 30. She just kind of stood there staring at me and beckoned her hand for me to come towards her, smiling the whole time. After she beckons and I don't respond, she opens the sliding back door and two young children step out. They look like they easily could have been these people's real children, but I'm not sure. They were all blonde and white and looked very similar, maybe between the ages of 5 and 7, one boy and one girl. Once the kids came out of the van, I had an initial feeling of relief, thinking maybe it was just a family who's readjusting their situation in the van, and I was thinking about something more sinister than what it really was. I had been a nanny for a while at this point, and new kids could be fussy after all. Once I could actually see the kids' faces and see the empty, vacant look in their eyes, my panic quickly returned. The woman tried to take the hand of the youngest girl, and she ripped her hand away. I don't know if the woman could see my facial expression change, or maybe see me start to run away, but she went full charge and ran at me. Like an Olympic track star, I swear. I was freaking out. I just turned and sprinted away as fast as I could. She ran after me for like a block or two, honestly much farther than I had expected. When I turned back, I could see the van driving full force towards me with her still on foot pursuing me. She looked like a quiet homemaker, so the fact that this lady could run like a beast still haunts me to this day. I ended up hopping the fence of a nearby neighbor's house, and it had a dog I was chummy with. I hid behind the fence and I could hear them get out of the van and approach it. At this point I was so terrified, there's no way I was looking up to see them again. Thankfully, my neighbor's dog saved the day and started barking like a crazy dog, which I think scared them off. As insane as these people seemed, I guess they didn't want to deal with that. I've told this situation to several people, including the police, all of whom said I'm probably just misreading a situation where they just wanted some directions. Yeah, right. Abductions are something that basically never happens in our small town, so I guess that accounts for the skepticism. One of the cops even said I didn't fit the meek body type people usually troll around to kidnap. Regardless of what anyone says, I know what happened, and I've never been able to forget it. By far one of the most intense situations in my life. And crazy, creepy family, let's never meet again. I'm an 18-year-old female, but when this happened, I was 13. I want to say this all began around Christmas and went on until February. I live in a small town in Massachusetts where nothing really happens at all. Most of the people in this town have lived here for generations, and everyone seems to know each other, more or less. In my neighborhood, there's a man who lived a few houses down from mine, named James. James was an older man in his late 50s. He lived alone, and for good reason, from what we understood. Because the talk around the town was that he was severely mentally ill. He had a tough childhood and had seen some pretty tough things in his life. He was known to be a doomsday prep type of person with hundreds and hundreds of non-perishable food items stacked throughout his house and a van. Yes, it was the classic creeper van type, as well as gas masks and other such items. He also had an affinity for fire. He would constantly have wild bonfires going in his backyard. Whether he was burning brush or anything else, they were always huge. He would pour gasoline and other accelerants on to make the flames bigger and the smoke darker. As kids, we were always told to stay away from the house at the bottom of the hill because he was known to yell at people walking by and just stare at them blankly until they were out of his sight. And I guess our parents didn't want us to be in a position where that would happen to us. One night, we had a house fire in the neighborhood, directly across from James's house. The house was occupied by an older man who would have died in the fire if not for his next-door neighbor who had run in and rescued him as the fire started in the garage, right under his second-floor bedroom. The house was almost a complete loss, leaving this man essentially homeless until his house was rebuilt. No one thought anything about it because accidents happen, right? Sometimes some people's homes just burn down because of an electrical shortage or some other reason. That lasted until we had another fire 3 days later. This time it was the house behind where James lived, as he had a corner lot. This fire too was set directly under the homeowner's bedroom, and if she had not smelled the smoke, the firefighters said her floor would have collapsed and there would have been no way to save her. The most gut-wrenching thing about this whole story for me is that this woman had lost her only son, who was 17, a year before in a car accident. Now she had lost her home, as well as her dog, who died from injuries he received in the fire. The second homeowner was adamant that she saw James walking around her house the night before the fire, almost as if he was scoping things out and looking for a good spot to start the fire. Now our attention was beginning to turn to James. He was interviewed by the police department, but he insisted he had nothing to do with it. They also had no evidence tying him to either fire, so they had to let him go. However, they installed security cameras on the telephone poles around his house so they could keep an eye on him if anything else happened. My whole neighborhood was terrified. We had a lot of young families with kids and older people around. Some went to stay with family, and everyone else kept all of their outside lights on to illuminate the streets in hopes of deterring James from wandering around as he usually did. However, one night I was up late as it was a weekend. I went out into the kitchen to get a snack. Over the sink there's a window that looks across the street down a path that leads to a park on the other side of my neighborhood. There was a street light right at the end of the path illuminating the entrance, and who do I see standing there under the light just staring at my house? It's James. Terrified, I ran into my room and hid under the covers until I fell asleep. I now know I should have told my parents, but I was young and too scared to do anything but hide. Luckily, I woke up the next morning and nothing had happened, so my family went about our day as normally as we could. The next morning, however, we woke up to good news. James had been arrested after he was caught trying to light fires under trucks at a local rental facility. It was like a U-Haul type deal. This time there were witnesses and security footage, so there was no escaping his guilt. He was charged with the attempted arson on the trucks as well as destruction of property. He was also a suspect in the 2 house fires as well as 3 other fires at construction sites along the same road that the U-Haul was on. He is now a patient at the State Mental Hospital prison ward, and from what I hear, he will be there for an extremely long time. So James, I sincerely hope I never see you in my neighborhood again. So some of you may have seen my post from last year on this subreddit where my ex-boyfriend left me alone in a sketchy part of Sacramento without even locking the door. And well, needless to say, my taste in men hasn't really gotten better since then. So the other day I swiped this pretty cool dude on Tinder named Gabe. He adds me on Snapchat and we start talking for a little bit. He decides to come pick me up and come smoke for a bit. I'm like, yeah, cool, whatever. In the Bay Area, smoking and driving is technically a date. But as soon as I get in the car, I get this really weird vibe. I don't know, his smile is way too wide or something, and he stared at me without blinking just slightly long enough to make me uncomfortable. Also, he wouldn't tell me anything about himself. He just kept saying, oh, you know, I make money doing this and that, whatever I can. And he would always refer to females as bitches. A major red flag. Well, a few blunts later, I'm starting to get tired and I'm like, so, you want to drive me home? And he goes, yeah, sure, I just gotta stop by the grocery store for a few things. And I'm like, alright. So we go to the grocery store by my house because we're still in my neighborhood. By this time, it's pretty dark, but there are some lights on in the parking lot. After about 5 minutes of sitting there while he's typing on his phone, I get kinda curious and look at the reflection on the driver's side window to see if I can read his text. I could. It read, yeah, I got her. Sitting in the Lucky's parking lot. I immediately went numb from head to toe. I decided I had to do something fast because I don't know who he's texting or why he's telling them where we are. I start to notice things like even though there's people near us, they're still kind of far away, like 25 to 35 feet away, and I almost start to panic. He didn't even notice anything though, so I asked him, aren't you gonna go inside? And he goes, yeah, one sec, I'm just making a list of the stuff that I need. I almost shit my pants. I could obviously see the texting app still open in the reflection in the window. He was lying. I immediately grabbed my bag and bolted out of the car and started walking towards the grocery store, almost running. He was like, hey, what the fuck? The hell do you think you're going? And tried to grab my bag, but I just made a direct beeline for the lit entrance of the store. I made it into the store and looked out the window to see him driving around the parking lot, talking on the phone, waving his hands around. Seconds later, he peeled out of the parking lot and almost hit another car. I called my mom to have her pick me up, and when I got home, he had unmatched me from Tinder and blocked me on Snapchat without saying anything. I'm not sure what your plan was, Gabe, but I'm also glad I never found out. So let's never, ever meet again. And quite frankly, I'm probably staying out of the dating scene for a while too. Let me take you back to the time when I was a 10-year-old girl, maybe less, with 2 younger brothers. My birth giver's marriage was on the rocks with alcoholism, women, abuse, fights. This was all part of my upbringing and a staple in the dungeon. Which led to the day I found this long box that looked very unfamiliar in my father's tool room. It was yellow with a man outlined holding a rifle. As young as I was, I knew that this was not good. My father was not a hunter or anything like that, and we lived in an apartment. I opened it, and sure enough, that's what was inside. It was not put together. I immediately called my brother at work and told her what I had found. She told me to take one of the pieces, including the bullets, and hide them to give them to her later. Not 1 second did I think this rifle was for our protection. No, I knew it was there to do us in, no question in even my child's mind. That tells you a lot about the kind of parents I had, doesn't it? Maybe 1 week later, my father comes home and goes straight to the room. He searches in there for a while we're having dinner with my 2 brothers. He flung the kitchen door open and asked my mother, "Where is my stuff?" He had this low, menacing tone to his voice, yet I could also tell he was very edgy. I knew he was talking about the rifle. I was freaking out. She said, "What do you need a rifle for? You planning on shooting pigeons?" You could cut the tension with a knife. After a staring contest that seemed to last for an eternity, he cussed and left. I never heard anything else about it. Not long after, they divorced, and he was out of our lives. For years, I wondered if my intuition had been correct. Would he have killed us all? Was he that desperate? I actually got to talk to him about 10 years ago on the phone, and asked him, after giving him all the details I remembered, I asked, "Were you planning on killing us right then and there?" After an agonizingly long silence, he said, "Yes." I didn't know what to say, nor what to think. Would it have been better if he just lied to me? I'll never know, but I knew that I didn't even feel the need to ask why. I think I always knew why. He just didn't want to lose. I don't know why he didn't try to carry it out later, though, but I'm glad he didn't. From all of this, I developed good intuitions and instincts with people. I learned to observe my environment quite well. When I feel something wrong with somebody, 9 times out of 10 I'm right, which has served me well thus far. I know it comes from a crappy upbringing. We have to look out for ourselves because our birth giver sure wouldn't. I have a great life now, with no contact with anyone from my past. I built a good life out here for myself in America. When I recall those memories, I still cannot believe that I lived and survived. I never thought I would pass 12, to be honest. Oh, and before that, he also kidnapped us, me and my brothers, from France to Algeria, but by the grace of God, we made it back to France. My final thought on all of this is always trust your instinct, no matter who it is, parents, teachers, your boss, anyone. If your gut tells you that something is off, trust it. Chances are you're correct, and even if you're not, it's better safe than sorry, right? Run, turn around, expose the darkness, speak up until somebody listens. Stand up, fight back. It's your right to do so. Even though your abuser told you not to, they're liars and cowards. You can heal, thrive, and overcome. And hey, Dad, even if you are my father, let's not meet again.